Okay, let's get into this deep dive. We're looking at the HELIOS 90102 quantum real mathematical engine.
Right, from Jefferson Lucas at Bare Metal Applied Science.
And the whole mission here is to kind of ditch the old model of remote cloud control.
Exactly. It's about establishing a new paradigm, what he calls the desktop quantum computer.
So you're not just using an SDK to ping a machine miles away.
No. He's built this surrogate quantum computer, a kind of command bridge that's right there on your workstation. It translates all that abstract logic
Into something tangible, human metaphors.
That's the key. And that whole philosophy starts right at the center of the system.
The atom core.
He made a very specific choice here. Barium-270, which is element 107.
And there's a deep reason for that, isn't there? It's not just a random heavy element.
Not at all. It's all about the symbolism. Barium-270, you see, is the longest-lived isotope we know of.
But its half-life is still just 61 seconds.
Just 61 seconds. It's a stroke of genius, really. That number perfectly mirrors the reality of current NISQ qubits.
Noisy intermediate scale quantum.
Yeah. Their coherence times are incredibly limited before they just degrade into noise.
So Lucas is visually telling the user, you're operating on an island of stability, but that island is sinking.
The clock is always ticking. It's a race against decoherence. It makes the whole process feel immediate and fragile.
And that limitation, that specific number, it also connects directly to the hardware being simulated.
It does. The simulation defaults to 2 electrons, or, 2 qubits.
Which isn't a random number.
No, it's an exact match for real desktop hardware, like the SpinQ Gemini. That's an NMR quantum computer that literally uses 2 nuclear spins.
So HELIOS is basically a high-fidelity digital twin of that machine.
Precisely.
Okay, so if the core sets the physical rules, how do you actually play with those rules? This is where it gets a little strange.
You mean the Blu-ray disc changer?
A Blu-ray changer? I mean, did he just pick the most obsolete piece of tech he could find in the office?
I know, it sounds funny, but it's a brilliant metaphor. Those discs aren't for storage.
They're modular physics kernels.
Exactly. When you load a disk, what you're really loading is a chaotic attractor.
A set of equations that defines the whole system's behavior, the rules of the universe for your qubit.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The Lorenz attractor disk, for example, is the stress test.
Right, it visualizes a ton of instability, a lot of phase noise.
But the real innovation is the other disk, the Aizawa manifold.
This is the key insight.
It is. Because a quantum system is fundamentally probabilistic, it's nonlinear. The Aizawa attractor is topologically equivalent to the Bloch sphere.
Which is the classic way physicists represent a qubit.
But it's usually static. Lucas gave us the most accurate visual representation of a qubit during computation. The vortex in the manifold, it models the exact transition between pure and mixed states.
That's wrapping immense complexity into a simple visual flight path. And he reinforces this idea of a simple interface with the software too, right?
He does, with a demo director class. It creates that ghost typist effect, taking what would be complex operations and boiling them down to simple shell commands.
So let's look at the architecture under the hood. It's not actually running on a quantum chip.
No, it's a hybrid engine. It leverages PyTorch for GPU-accelerated tensor operations. So you're simulating a QPU on standard hardware, like an RTX 3070.
And it's already built to be future-ready.
Very much so. The integration of Thread-to-Quest shows the path forward. It can interface with Google Gemini or even local models like a Llama.
So you stop coding and start conversing with the system to set parameters.
It's a huge step for human-machine interfaces. Lucas has bridged this massive gap between abstract quantum mechanics and a fluid, high-fidelity user experience. It proves complex systems don't need complex controls.
Which leaves a really important question for you, our listener. If a reality as complex as quantum mechanics, and the sources even mention this being used for tokamak fusion research, can be visualized and controlled using the flight path of a simple chaotic attractor, what other scientific fields are just waiting for their own radical intuitive interface overhaul?
All right, let's dive right in. We got a fantastic question from one of you, and it really it gets right to the heart of what makes quantum engineering so difficult. It's about this paradox. On one hand, you have a real quantum computer, the SpinQ Gemini. It creates this fragile thing called a magic state, and then it's gone in seconds.
Not even seconds.
Milliseconds.
Milliseconds.
Yeah.
And all while using a pretty modest 60 watts of power. But then you have a simulation of the exact same thing, HELIOS 902, and it's perfectly stable, but it's running on a GPU that's burning, what, 220 watts or more. It just feels backward. It does feel backward. And this is the perfect place to start because it is the ultimate showdown. It's the clean, idealized world of math clashing with the messy, power-hungry reality of physics.
So our mission today is to unpack what that magic state really is and why keeping it alive is such an expensive battle against nature itself.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start there. This magic state. It sounds pretty crucial.
It's everything. It's basically the fuel you need to go from doing simple quantum operations to, universal quantum computing.
Things like running complex algorithms.
Right. To do that, you need special tools. Special gates, like the T-gate. They're called non-Clifford gates. The magic state is what lets you use them.
So in the SpinQ hardware, which is NMR-based, right? It runs at room temperature.
It is. And that room temperature part is the absolute core of the problem. The environment is just. It's constantly attacking that delicate quantum memory.
And that's the process we call decoherence.
That's decoherence. And in this case, it's a very specific mechanism called T2 relaxation or spin-spin relaxation.
So in practical terms, what does that mean for the information you've put into the qubit?
It means it forgets rapidly and brutally. The precise phase alignment that makes it quantum gets completely scrambled by all the thermal noise and molecules tumbling around.
So the state just randomizes itself.
Exponentially fast. In roughly 300 milliseconds, your beautiful quantum state is just garbage. It's noise.
300 milliseconds. That is barely a blink of an eye. That's shockingly fast.
It is.
Which, okay, that brings us straight back to the power paradox. If the state is so unstable, why is the perfectly stable simulation burning over 220 watts?
Because that 220 watts is buying you something completely different. It's paying for logic switching.
For the GPU to do the math.
Billions of transistors flipping over and over just to calculate the matrices. The state is perfectly safe because it's not a real quantum state. It's just a numpy array sitting in computer memory.
So the GPU is getting hot doing classical math to pretend to be quantum.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So then what about the 60 watts in the actual hardware? If it isn't for useful computation and the state dies anyway, what is that power even doing?
It's paying what I like to call a thermodynamic tax. Yeah, it's not doing any useful work for your algorithm. It's pure overhead. Think of it like the machine is just running its own life support. It's using power for precision temperature controllers to keep a magnet incredibly stable, for RF amplifiers to gently nudge the spins. That 60 watts is the constant energy cost to actively fight entropy, even if you only win that fight for 300 milliseconds at a time.
And I guess that directly explains why you can't just save the state in the SpinQ or repair it when it starts to decay.
You can't. The process you'd need is called magic state distillation. It's a clever technique where you take many of those noisy, short-lived states and, you distill them into one high-purity one.
But that sounds like it will require more resources to pull off.
A lot more. To run the error-correcting code for that distillation, you typically need at least 5 qubits working together.
And the SpinQ Gemini only has 2.
It only has 2. So what you witnessed was the raw, unprotected, unforgiving fragility of a quantum state with no way to fight back.
So the key takeaway here seems pretty stark then. The simulation's 220 plus watts is just the electrical cost of rendering the idea of coherence. A perfect picture.
It's the cost of drawing a perfect picture, exactly.
But the hardware's 60 watts. That's the real physical energy price you pay just to hold back the chaos of the universe for a brief moment.
That's it. It's the energy needed just to maintain that possibility of coherence. And that actually leads to the final, bigger thought I want to leave you with. This tiny 2-qubit system uses 60 watts just for that overhead. Now imagine a future fault-tolerant system that can actually perform that distillation we talked about. The energy costs are going to be enormous.
Kilowatts, not watts.
Kilowatts easily. For huge cryogenic cooling systems, for all the complex control hardware, it shows that the true entry fee for universal quantum computing won't just be about building more qubits. It's going to be about sourcing the raw electrical power needed to constantly defeat thermodynamics on a massive scale.